Do you still visit a classroom to learn new skills? Not anymore. Quick Start now offers a virtual classroom which allows you to interact with live instructors and students to grow your knowledge, skill set, and practical experience through a remote connection. This means you can now get trained from any part of the world. Our seasoned instructors have the experience and practical exposure to provide you with the knowledge, live examples, personal experiences, and tips to help you learn and master new skills.
Hi, I'd like to introduce you to a little bit of what goes on in the 20462 course, the course called Administering Microsoft SQL Server 2014 Databases. And the name of it is a good description. That's exactly the class that it is, and it's an excellent class for those of you who would like to become a DBA focusing on SQL 2014. My name is Jeff Rathjen, and I am the Senior Principal Instructor here at Quick Start. I've been working with SQL Server since it became a product back in the late 80s. My responsibility is pretty simple. I teach SQL Server. That's all I do. And when you sit in a class with me, my expectation will be that when you walk out of here at the end of class, you have learned everything that you came to the class to learn, that you've learned a few things you didn't even know that you needed to know, and that overall, you're just thrilled with the class. That's my expectation. I would normally at this point have my students introduce themselves to me so I can get a better feel for who they are and what it is that they want to learn and why are they taking the class, so that I could tailor some of the things to exactly get them what they need to do. As I mentioned, we're going to be running class for a week, and the class hours start at 8 a.m. Pacific time. All times that we deal with here at Quick Start are Pacific time, and they'll start at 8 a.m. and they'll go till whenever we're done with the class. Generally speaking, I assume that that will be about 3 o'clock Pacific time. But the way we do things here at Quick Start may be a little different. We do all of the lecture and discussion portion of the class in the morning. Then we break for lunch, and then we do all the labs in the afternoon. The reason we've gone to doing this is simple. We found that over the years of teaching that some students are faster at the labs and some are slower. The ones who are faster were frustrated in a traditional do a little lecture, a little lab, little lecture, little lab kind of environment. They were frustrated by the fact that they finished the lab and then they'd sit and do nothing and felt like it was wasting their time. The other students were frustrated as well because they were feeling like they never quite finished with the labs, or else they were rushed to get through with them. By moving all of the lab work to the afternoon, it frees you up from that. You can take as long or as short a time as you would like to finish the labs. If you would like to go back and redo some of the labs, pick up where you've left off, anything you'd like to do with that, that's fine. Now, there's always someone there. Obviously, there's someone in the morning. It will be me for this class teaching. And then in the afternoon, there will always be someone there to mentor you through the labs. So if you get stuck with a question, I don't really understand how the lab works, or I'm doing it and it's frustrating because it's not working, there will always be someone there. It might be me, it might be one of our associate instructors, but there will always be someone there to help you with your labs in case you have questions. And then the labs will simply last until whenever you're done with them. Now let's just talk a little bit about what happens in the class as far as your course materials are concerned. We have a long time ago decided to work exclusively with digital courseware. I know some people don't like that, and I have to be honest, when I first looked at it, I didn't like it either. I wanted my old physical books. But after working with them for a little bit, I've come to really appreciate the digital content because I can take it with me wherever I go without lugging around a bunch of physical books. And you always have the option of printing out your book. So if you'd like a physical copy, you can certainly get one. But we'll be providing electronic copy. One of the big advantages to that is that you will be able to share notes with each other in the class, and I, as the instructor, will be able to share notes with you. So if I have some notes, a helpful article on this or a good website to go look at, whatever, those will be in my notes, and by having an electronic copy, they automatically show up in your book as well. Excuse me. Now, as far as the outline is concerned, basically I want to walk you through this to let you know what you should expect when you take this class. The first module is an introduction to database administration. What kinds of things should a DBA be expected to do? It's often a mystery. What do I do as a DBA? What are my actual tasks? And we'll talk about that. In Module 2, we'll talk about installation, upgrading, and post-installation or post-upgrade things you need to check. So after you've installed it, what do you need to go check to make sure that everything's working well? And that's Module 2. In Module 3, we talk about databases and storage. So we're going to get into what a database is. When you create it, what settings should you use? What should you change on an existing database? How many files should you have? Where should they be? How big should they be? All of that kind of information. How do I deal with the transaction log that's kind of run away? It's gotten bigger and bigger. What do I do about that? Those are the kinds of things we'll talk about with Module 3 on storage. We're going to focus primarily on the physical medium of storage, so that our files are going to be a huge portion of that topic. Modules 4 and 5, we're going to talk about backup and restore. Kind of important things, at least I think they are. The ability to back up your database and knowing what happens when you back up. So what is it that's really going on when you do a backup? Is it just backing up the file? Well, no. And so we'll talk about what it is. We'll talk about the mechanics of how you do a backup. How do you accomplish that? We'll talk about how to do that using the GUI in SQL Management Studio and how to do it by using code. We'll talk about why one is better than the other. We'll talk about some of the gotchas and the many various kinds of backups that you can perform. We'll also talk about, in Module 5, we'll talk about restoring databases, because after all, backing up your database isn't much good if you can't restore it. We'll talk about the kinds of events that will cause you to do a restore, and that's often surprising to people. We don't restore for the same reasons that a lot of people might think. So we'll talk about why you might want to restore, and then of course, how do you restore? And then finally, what do you restore? Of all the backups that I've taken, what should I be restoring? And we'll focus on backup and restore in terms of minimizing my downtime, minimizing my restore time. So we'll talk about RPO and RTO, two concepts that deal with how much data can you lose and how long can that server be down before it becomes a business problem. We'll talk about how to match those SLAs for RPO and RTO in SQL Server by doing a restore. Module 6, importing and exporting data. When I do this, I generally go a little bit off the track, because I've found in the real world, most of what we do for importing and exporting data is done using SQL Integration Services, SSIS. So we're going to focus a lot more on SSIS in Module 6 than the book really allows for. So we'll be doing some extra labs and some extra work in there so that you can get your hands on the tool that's really used in the real world to move data from one place to another. Typically, we call that process ETL, or extract, transform, and load. We'll talk about what it is. We'll talk about how to do it and how not to do it, by the way. Modules 7 and 8 are kind of two halves to the same coin. Monitoring SQL Server and tracing SQL Server. Monitoring is all about grabbing information about performance, and stability. How long has it been up? When did it go down last? How is it performing? How does it perform today compared to 6 weeks ago? Someone calls you up and says, oh, SQL Server seems to be running slow. How do you know? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in Module 7, Monitoring SQL Server. In Module 8, we're going to focus on tracing, which is more about live activity. What's happening right now? Who's doing what? Why is the server suddenly clogged up and one person is blocking all of these other people? How do I find that person to make them stop? Those kinds of things we'll be looking at in tracing. So in Module 7, we'll be looking at one of the major tools we'll look at is Performance Monitor. In Module 8, one of the major tools we'll look at is SQL Profiler and Trace Events. Module 9 and 10, we really talk about security. In Module 9, we deal with good old-fashioned security, the way most people think of it. Users, logins, permissions, accounts, roles, those kinds of things. Who can do what to what thing? Which objects should be protected from just everybody? What are schemas? All that kind of information we're going to be talking about in Module 9. In Module 10, still talking about security, but maybe a little less traditional way, we're going to talk about two topics, auditing and encryption. Auditing is finding out who did what, when, where, and how. Maybe not why, but everything else. Who did this? Who dropped that database? Who shrunk that log file? Who did these things so we can audit? We'll talk about some of the legal responsibilities that you have with auditing. And then finally, we'll talk about encryption. How do I make sure my database, even if it falls into some bad guy's hands, how do we ensure that they can't read our data? Well, that's through encryption, and we'll talk about that. Module 11 is kind of an interesting module. There are 3 different topics, and they kind of each one of them were too small to fit into their own module, so they jammed them together. They don't really have much to do with each other, but it's kind of, they lump it and call it ongoing maintenance. So we're going to talk about database integrity. We're going to talk about your data integrity and how to make sure that the database does not have corruption in it, and if it does, what you should do about that. The next thing we'll talk about in there is we'll talk about indexes. Now, I know indexes is a topic that should be a whole week-long topic in some ways, but we're going to get you started with indexes and then get you pointed to some good resources for more detailed index information. And in there, we'll talk about the difference between a column store index and a row-based index. We'll talk about clustered indexes and non-clustered indexes, those kinds of things. In Module 12, we're going to talk about, in Module 11, one other thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about automation through maintenance plans. So we're going to talk about how to create a SQL maintenance plan and how to run that and what it does. Modules in 12 and 13 kind of jam together, and they basically allow me to show you how to do alerts and operators and notifications, and then finally SQL agent jobs. How do I create a SQL agent job and have it scheduled so that it runs so that, for instance, I don't have to come in each night at midnight to run my backup. That's where we're headed for this class. I hope that sounds interesting to you. That's where we're headed. And if there are any questions, contact your sales rep and they'll be able to get you in touch with me or probably just get you the answers themselves. Thanks a lot. I hope to see you in class sometime, and take care.
To learn more about this course, review the course outline on quickstart.com and click the hyperlinked modules to view the module recordings.